And
wait, how do you? Oh wait,
all right, how you guys doing?
good.
Okay. All right, so what we are going to do today is we are starting our new section. So this is the cardiovascular system. And we're going to start with a lesson on the heart. Here, let me get me turned on here. So right now, oh, I've got a few people in the waiting room. Just give me a second. Let's get them all in there. Okay. So we are going to start talking about the heart. I have yet to post this, but I'll do that after this session. Okay. Any questions to start off before we get started with our lesson?
This is going to be posted on YouTube, right?
Yes.
Okay, because I have to leave in about 15 minutes.
Yep, that's no worries. This is Keegan,
So for
right?
these, are we supposed to be taking notes?
I will put both copies. So what you can do is watch this later and take notes. I didn't have time to put this all together the way I truly wanted it.
Okay.
So what I would expect for you for today is just to watch and
Okay.
ask questions, and then you can take notes. I'll have a student copy available if that helps you learn, or if just rewatching the video helps you learn, you can do that.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? All right. So we'll get started. You can ask questions with the chat panel as well. So don't forget about that. Let me just open that so I can see. I see one of you can't hear me. In the chat panel, can you just tell me if those of you who can hear me, just put a yes. Okay. Cora, you might want to just mess around with it a little bit. It looks like everyone else can hear me, so there might be something going on from your end. All right. So I will just keep the chat open so you guys can chat with me as we go through this. Okay, so this is the heart. And again, I'm not great at this, so I will do my best as we go through. I'm just going to annotate this a little bit and get out of this page. There we go. All right. And, oh. All right. I'm just going to slide that up. There we are. And learning how the heart works. Cora, were you able to get it fixed? There's a couple suggestions there for you. Oh, and we're going to do a quick lesson here on the heart. I'm going to type a little chat here. You might want to just play with your mic just to a little bit, Cora. All right. Okay, well, I have 20 of you out of 50 some. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just talk about the heart. All right, so what we have, first of all, is we've got to learn. Thank you very much, Jason, for helping out. We're going to learn, first of all, a few of the common terms that we need to know. So terms. We have here our cardio, so cardii or cardio, and the meaning of that term is heart.
So for example, if we have something that says cardiac arrest, that means our heart has stopped, right? Arrest means to stop. So a cardiac heart arrest stop, okay? Pulmon or pulmono. So that is, just gonna move these around here a little bit. Pulmono is referring to the lungs. Okay. So when we have a pulmonary artery, which we're going to talk about today, that's lungs that are, or a pulmonary artery is an artery that's leading towards the lungs. So pulmo or pulmono means lungs. Brady means slow. Okay, so bradycardia, cardi, that's our heart that we see over here. Just going to turn a little spotlight on. Okay, so pulmono, or sorry, Brady is slow. Bradycardia, cardia is heart. So bradyia, slow heart rate. Okay, tachy means rapid. So tachycardia means a fast heart rate. Okay, Stetho means chest, so it's referring to the chest. So stethoscope is a scope that does an examination of the chest. Vas or vaso means vessels. So when we talk about vasodilation, we're talking about dilating blood vessels. And when we're talking about vasoconstriction, that's constricting blood vessels. So quick question to you, you can put it in your chat. Do you guys know what dilation means? So with one or two words, just write what you think dilation means. Don't all chat at once. Not getting, dilation actually means to expand, right? So the diameter is getting larger. Exactly, okay? So when our diameter is expanding or getting larger, that's dilation. So vasodilation means that our blood vessels are expanding or getting larger. So with a couple words, you can write, what do you think vasoconstriction means? Vasoconstriction. So vaso is blood vessel, right? So our blood vessels are getting smaller. So vasoconstriction, blood vessels are starting to get smaller. So there's some reasons why our blood vessels will change in size, and we'll talk about those as we go along a little bit more. Peri, so peri means around. I'm wondering if I can move my controls. I can, yay, okay. So peri means around, so pericardium, we're talking about something that goes around cardia, heart, so around the heart, okay? So those are our common terms. So those are the terms about the cardiovascular system that you need to know. All right, so let's go on to our next slide here. Oops. So here what we're looking at in this image is just looking at the heart. So we see where the heart's placed. So it's right behind the lungs. We can kind of see that it's sort of in the middle of the body. Just going to turn that on. So we see that it's in the middle of our chest with the bottom part of it, which is called the apex. So that's pointed a little bit this direction, which is towards the left side of our body. Okay. All right. Just a couple interesting facts. These are things that you don't have to memorize. All right. So average adult heartbeats about 70 times a minute. So if we averaged 70 years as a lifetime, 2.5 billion times in a lifetime that heart beats. And that's why it's so important to try to keep our heart healthy by getting exercise. So right now, while we're all trying to practice self-isolation, make sure you're getting yourself outside and getting some exercise. Squeezing a tennis ball tightly. So if you took a tennis ball and you squeezed it, okay, that's how hard your heart is working to pump. And we're going to talk about how a healthier heart doesn't have to work quite as hard. And we'll get into that a little bit later on our next lesson. Okay. So the layers of the heart. So the first layer of the heart is called the endocardium. So the endocardium, endo means inside. So that's the inside layer that's lining the heart. Okay. The next layer is the myocardium. Myo means muscle. So this is heart muscle. So muscle associated with the heart. and it works to pump blood throughout our entire body. So this muscle is very important to us. Our myocardium is our thickest layer of our heart. And then our epicardium, that's the outermost layer of our heart. Okay, so it's a thin layer and it's the outermost layer. Okay. All right, so if we take a look here, I'm just going to close these down. So when we look at the layers of the heart, okay, so here we see the heart, and here's a section of the heart. And in this little section of the heart, what we see is, this is a blown up part of the section of the heart, okay? So now I'm gonna just look at the chat room here. Whoops, Alt. So in the chat room, just gonna make sure we were letting everyone in. Yep, okay. Sorry, just getting used to this. In the chat room, I want you to tell me what we just talked about, what is the outermost layer of the heart? So that's this layer right here that we talked about, that outermost layer. Anyone want to write that down in the chat room for me? So endo is the innermost layer. So the outer, yes, outer is epi, that's right. Okay, so the outer layer is the epicardium. All right, now this great big thick layer, a couple of you just write down, what's that great big thick layer called of the heart? Okay, come on, a couple of you write this down in your chat, great big thick layer. Right, the myocardium, that's the muscle. We really need to make sure that this muscle layer stays healthy, okay? And then, so I'll just open that up there so we can see it. Myocardium. So then this layer, what do we call that? Okay, innermost layer. Come on, guys. Don't all type. Right. Endocardium. Okay, so that's the innermost layer of the heart. So that's our endocardium. Okay. All right, so now we go over here, and there's a couple things we haven't talked about yet. So there's actually this membrane, this kind of sac that goes around the heart, and that sac has a special name. It's called the pericardium. Whoops, I'm going backwards here for some reason. There we go. The pericardium. So we can see over there, that's that sac. And there's a little cavity here with the pericardium, and that cavity is called the pericardial cavity. And that cavity gets filled up with some fluid, which is called the pericardial fluid. Okay? All right. So the pericardium is a sac that encloses the heart. So we can see all this tissue. That's the pericardium. I was truly hoping that I could dissect a heart for you, but it might not look that way. I might be able to and show you that on a Zoom session a little bit later. Okay, so what we're seeing here is this sac that encloses the heart. So that's the pericardium. And the pericardial fluid is in this little space right here. Okay, if you can see that. So it reduces friction as the heart moves. So it's really important to the heart. Any guesses? So I'm just going to open up my chat here. Oops. Why is that not opening? What? Just give me one sec. I need to open my chat panel here. There we go. Any guesses what we call an infection or inflammation of the pericardium? Pardon me? Any guesses what we call an inflammation or infection of the pericardium? You can write that in your chat. What do you think? Any guesses? Right. Pericarditis. So pericarditis, I'll type it here so you guys can see what it looks like. Just let me get that off of me here. Okay, so pericarditis. And that's an inflammation of the pericardium, and it actually can cause your chest to get really sore because it's hurting every time your heart pumps. Okay. All right, so if we look over here, we've got the pericardium, there's the pericardium, and now this is just labeling the fluid, which is the pericardial fluid. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so function of the heart. Well, the whole purpose of the heart is to move blood around the body, okay? So that's the whole section, so it's Earth, whole purpose. Here's we see what an actual heart would look like as opposed to the pictures that we're going to be taking a look at. Okay. Still getting used to this. So what it's doing, what it does is it pumps. Part of its job is to keep oxygenated blood separated from deoxygenated. So notice here that I have oxygenated colored in red and deoxygenated colored in blue. So I'm going to try to keep that pattern. Deoxygenated blood means blood that's given away its oxygen. It's not completely without oxygen, and it is not blue. So in your body, deoxygenated blood is not actually blue colored, but it's a way for us to figure out which blood is where to have those colors. Okay. Our heart also ensures that blood flow is in one direction. Okay, it pumps, so our heart pumps, forcing blood into the arteries. So some of our arteries will lead to our lungs where the blood can get oxygen, and some of our arteries will lead to our body where our cells can get that oxygen. Okay, so we have two pumps in our heart. On the right side, deoxygenated blood is pumped, and on the left side, oxygenated blood is pumped. On the left and right side are separated by a muscle that's called the septum. Okay. Okay. So that separates the right and left sides of the heart. Okay. So the right and left pump, they contract simultaneously. So the right, there's two pumps on both sides. So pump, 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 pump. They're always pumping at the same time. Okay. All right, so our heart has 4 chambers. So we have a 4-chambered heart. Not all species have a 4-chambered heart. Okay, so here we see where those chambers would be. So this first chamber is called the right atrium. And the right atrium has deoxygenated blood in it. That's why we see this blue color. Okay, and then we have the blood's going through this little valve here into the right ventricle. Okay, and then that deoxygenated blood is going to make its way to our lungs to get oxygen. And then the oxygenated blood comes back to the heart, and it's going to enter through this chamber, which is called the left atrium. From the left atrium, it's going to go through this valve into this chamber, which is called the left ventricle. Okay. All right. I can't. Okay, I'm just going to go to the chat here. Any questions so far? Okay, so we're good so far. It's all making sense. Lots of new words to learn. Okay. All right, and we will just keep on keeping on. Okay, so the right and left atria. I just got asked if there's a note package. There will be, I just haven't posted it yet. So after this meeting, I'll post the note package along with our video session. All right, so the right and left atria. So atria is just the plural form, atrium is the singular form. So the upper chambers, just gonna make this work here. Upper chambers collect blood coming into the heart. That's what our atrium do. So blood comes into the heart, goes into our atriums. Atria pump the blood through valves into our ventricles. Atria are pretty thin walled, and both atria pump at the same time, as I said before. Our right and left ventricles are thick walled muscle, and they both pump at the same time as well. Okay, so now in the chat, what I would like you to do is just give me, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, guys. Go back to this. There we go. What I'd like you to do in the chat is tell me why you think, with a couple of words, the ventricles have thicker muscle than the atrium. Any ideas? If you're more comfortable using your mic, go ahead and unmute yourself and give me an answer. Okay, so I'm seeing, so the question tray was, why is the muscle thicker for the ventricles than it is for the atrium? Okay. Not so much that we have more blood, but that we have a longer distance for the blood to go. Okay, so that the ventricles have to pump the blood a longer distance. I saw a hand up if you want to just ask me your question through the microphone. Okay, so when we think about the atrium pumping just has to pump the blood to the ventricles, which are right next door, where the ventricles have to pump the blood around the body. So it's a much longer distance that the blood has to go. So this muscle has to be pretty strong in order to do that. Okay, right. Thank you, Braden. So the ventricles help the blood cover more distance. Exactly right. Okay. Okay, Keegan, we will see you the next time.
Bye, Keegan.
Okay, so now we'll just move on to the next one here. Where did my tools go? Sorry, guys. And okay, just trying to get my tools back up. It's not working for me here. Hold on. Lost my mouse. Trying to help me here. I'm just going to do it with my finger because it seems to be working better. There we go. Okay, well, we knew there was going to be little hiccups along the way here. There we are. And sorry about that, guys. Okay, so the right chambers, so the right side of our heart pumps deoxygenated blood. So I colored that in blue. And the left chambers pump oxygenated blood, and the septum, that's the wall that divides the left and right side of the heart. Okay. All right, so the right atrium collects deoxygenated blood that's coming into the heart, and that deoxygenated blood is coming from some big blood vessels. So these are the biggest veins in our body, and they're called the vena cava. So there's two vena cava. There's the superior. Superior, we remember before, means above or higher. So they're collecting blood from the top part of our body. And inferior, lower, they're collecting blood from the lower part of our body. Okay. So this deoxygenated blood comes into our heart. And then this blood goes into the right atrium. And then the right atrium will pump the blood into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will pump deoxygenated blood into the lungs, okay, through the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so from the pulmonary arteries, the deoxygenated blood is going to go to the lungs, and that's where it can collect up some oxygen. Okay. All right, and then if we look at the left side of the heart, the left atrium collects oxygenated blood coming into the heart from the pulmonary veins and pumps this blood into the left ventricle. And the left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood to the body through the aorta, which is our largest artery. Okay, so again, we're going to just take a look here. So we have these chambers, and what I want you guys to do is tell me the names of the chambers. So, oh, got one person here. All right, this chamber here, what do we call it? Quickly write it down for me in the chat. Okay, what's this chamber called? Okay, anyone? Yes, thank you. So the first chamber here is the right atrium. Okay, next chamber. Ah, told you already, right ventricle. Thank you guys. All right, and then the blood coming back here from the lungs is going to enter here. What do we call this chamber? Good, so that's the left atrium. And then the next chamber, what do we call this one? Thank you, left ventricle. Okay, perfect. All right, so we need to know what the chambers are in the heart. So those are the 4 main chambers. All right, we also have to know the valves that the blood flows through. So we have 4 valves, okay? And if we look at this diagram here, just let me get rid of my little image. If we look at this diagram, here we see this is the vena cava. So that's the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava. Blood's going into the right atrium, but that blood has to travel through a valve into the right ventricle. And then it's going to travel through a valve to leave the heart through the pulmonary arteries. Okay. And then over here, what we see is the pulmonary veins. They're bringing blood back to the heart. Okay. Into the left atrium and then into the left ventricle. And we see where these little valves are. So what's the purpose of the valve? So there's a valve right in the before the ventricle and after the ventricle on both sides of the heart. These are one-way valves and they force the blood to go in one direction. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about these valves. But we see here's an open valve, so that's an image of an open valve, and then here's an image of a closed valve where the blood can't flow back, right? That's the whole point, is for the blood not to be able to flow backwards. Okay. All right, so we're going to label these valves first. Okay, so we have 4 different valves in the heart that we need to know about. All right, so as blood's flowing, so here's the right atrium, and then the blood's going to flow from the right atrium through this first valve, and that first valve is called the tricuspid valve. Okay, so it's going through the tricuspid valve. And the tricuspid valve has these tendons that help to support it. They're called chordae tendineae. You don't have to memorize that name. And then it goes into the chamber that is the right ventricle. Okay. As soon as the right ventricle, or sorry, the right ventricle. As soon as the right ventricle contracts, it causes this valve to close. And then the blood gets forced out through the next ventricle, this one here. Okay. And that's called the pulmonary valve. And the pulmonary valve goes towards the heart. That's why its name is pulmonary. So these are the pulmonary arteries. So there's the pulmonary valve. Our other 2 valves, so blood's going to come from the pulmonary veins from the heart, nice and oxygenated, goes into the right atrium, or sorry, left atrium, and then from the left atrium, it's going to go through this first valve here. And this first valve is called the bicuspid valve. Okay. And then from the bicuspid valve, through this chordae tendineae that's supporting that valve, that blood's going to go here now into the aortic valve. And it goes from there into the aorta. Okay. So those are the different valves that you have to know. All right. So the atrioventricular valves, these are the valves that are found between the atria and the ventricles. Okay. And whoever's kind of messing around in their kitchen, if you could just turn your sound off, that would be awesome. Okay. All right, so the atrioventricular valves are found between the atria and the ventricles, prevents the backflow of blood from the ventricles into the atrium. It's held in place by the chordae tendineae, and when the valve is open, blood flows from the atrium to the ventricle. Okay. And then what happens is in order for the blood to move along, the ventricles have to contract. Okay, so as soon as the ventricles contract, bam, the atrioventricular valves close. Okay, they just slam shut. And that makes that first sound in our heart, which is a lub, lub. Okay, so slam shut, and we get this lub sound. Okay. The tricuspid valve is between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the bicuspid valve is between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Okay, and we already labeled those on our diagram. Semilunar valves are found between the ventricles and the arteries. So these valves prevent the backflow of blood from the artery back into the ventricle. And when the valve is open, blood flows from the ventricle to the artery. Okay. The valve closes when the ventricle relaxes. So when the ventricle contracts, those atrioventricular valves close. When the ventricle starts to relax, the semilunar valves close. And that's the second heart sound, which is called a dub. So first valves close, lub, second valves close, dub. So we get this lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub every time our heart beats. Okay. All right, so the pulmonary valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, and then the aortic valve is between the left ventricle and the aorta. Okay. All right. Somehow I can't make my chat work the way it's supposed to, but that's okay. All right. Any questions so far? All right, so what I'm going to do right now is just summarize what we just talked about. Okay, so just what we were talking about with the heart. Okay, so deoxygenated blood from the body is carried to the right atrium through the vena cava. The right atrium contracts and forces blood through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. The right ventricle contracts, causing the tricuspid valve to close, forcing blood out of the right ventricle through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary arteries. Okay. The deoxygenated blood now moves to the lungs. On the other side, now oxygenated blood coming from the lungs is carried to the left atrium through the pulmonary veins. The left atrium contracts and forces blood through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle contracts, causing the bicuspid valve to close, forcing blood out of the left ventricle through the aortic valve and into the aorta. That's a lot of stuff for you guys to remember, okay? The oxygenated blood moves now to the body tissue. Okay, so if we take a look at this diagram, this is a diagram that you guys are going to have to be able to label. So I do have all the labels online, but we're just going to look at watching as the blood goes through, okay? I'm just going to check this here. Okay. So we start off with the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Okay, so we see that the superior vena cava is at the top. So this is where the blood is starting to enter. Oops. Okay, and the blood's entering the right atrium through those parts. The next part that our blood flows through is the right atrium. So from the vena cava, it goes through the right atrium. From the right atrium through the tricuspid valve, then into the right ventricle, then through the semilunar valve, which in this case, what's this particular semilunar valve called? Sorry guys, let's turn my chat back on. Right, so this is the pulmonary valve, which I'll fix and label that on your diagram. Okay, and then from the pulmonary valve, it's going to go to the pulmonary artery. Okay, from the pulmonary arteries, so another little quick chat here. Whoops. Let me fix what I just did here. share my screen again. Sorry, guys. There we go. Where does the blood go from the pulmonary arteries? Okay. Ah, goodness. Okay. Where does the blood go from the pulmonary arteries? Where's its next stop? Right. So from the pulmonary arteries, it goes to the lungs. Okay. So we want to keep that kind of clear. Pulmonary arteries, it goes to the lungs. Okay. All right. So next we have from the pulmonary arteries. Let's get back up to my little thing here. Yes. There. To the lungs, and then the blood comes back through the pulmonary veins where it's going to enter the left atrium. From the left atrium, it's going to go into the bicuspid valve, through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it's going to go up, and we can see that number 8 over here, to the semilunar valve. What's the semilunar valve, this particular semilunar valve, called? Okay, what's the semilunar valve that's coming? Aortic, thank you. So the aortic valve. So this semilunar valve is called the aortic valve, and again, I will fix that on your copy a little bit later. And then from that, the blood's going to go through the aorta, and then from the aorta, it's going to go to the rest of the body. Okay. And then I labeled down here as well the septum. The septum is this muscle, and that muscle separates the left and the right side of the heart. Okay. I don't do that either. There we go. Okay. Our heart also has to get its supply of nutrients. So the heart tissue must have nutrients and oxygen. So I'm not talking about the chambers in the heart. The chambers in the heart pump blood around the body, but we need to have an ability to remove wastes and to gain nutrients and oxygen for all those muscle cells and the cells of the epicardium and the endocardium. So how those cells get actual blood is through something called coronary circulation. So that's how blood flows to and from the heart tissue. So the oxygenated blood that's going to go to the heart tissue is through the coronary arteries. So the coronary arteries supply blood vessels, supply oxygen and nutrients to the heart. Okay, and they branch off of the aorta. So remember, the aorta is where the blood goes that's being pumped from the left ventricle. Okay, the cardiac veins carry deoxygenated blood from the heart tissue to this area called the coronary sinus, and then that goes back to the right atrium where it can be pumped from the heart to the lungs and get oxygen again. Okay. All right, and then our last image of the day here, if we take a look. So what we see with this image is, I'm just going to spotlight this. We can see all the blood vessels that are providing nutrients. So everything that's red, those are coronary arteries, and they're providing nutrients to the heart. And everything that's blue, those are coronary veins, and they're going to take away all the waste from the heart. All right. So if we look at our coronary arteries, the coronary arteries are branching right directly off of the aorta, and they're feeding the heart. So if we have a block in our coronary artery, that means our heart muscle's not getting fed. And if it doesn't get fed, those muscles can die and we can suffer from a heart attack. Okay, so it's important for our heart to stay healthy. I have a couple of labels here. So the first one over here, I can make this work. There we are. Is the right coronary artery. So right atrium, this is the right coronary artery. So it's going to feed the right side of the heart. Okay. Over here, we have the left coronary artery. So that's going to feed the left side of the heart with oxygen and nutrients. Okay. And then over here, we have the small cardiac veins. So that's going to take all that waste from the cells of the heart and bring that waste back to the heart. Now, first, all of that blood gets dumped somewhere, and the place, oh, I have another one here. I didn't label. Oh, sorry, guys. Go back. There we go. I forgot to label this. This is one of the veins here. So this is a cardiac vein. But all of those veins go to what's called the coronary sinus. And that's just a big dumping spot for all of this deoxygenated blood. And then from there, all of that deoxygenated blood is going to go to which chamber of the heart? So I'd like you to just tell me in the chat, all of that deoxygenated blood from the heart tissue, what chamber of the heart is that going to go back to? Anyone? Exactly, it's going to go back to the right atrium, okay? All right, so that is it for today. So that's what we're doing. So what we're going to do now is, I just want to talk about what our next steps are. So I will post this as well as the student copy if you have value in printing out the student copy and writing out notes, if that's helpful to you, to try to memorize where all of these structures are. I'll have a worksheet for you that I will post. That worksheet needs to come back to me. I'll put a deadline for it, but I believe it'll be on Wednesday, I think is what I said my deadline was. Okay, so you'll have tomorrow to study, and I have some readings from your textbook as well. Not just to supplement what we've talked about, just so you can hear it from a little bit of a different way. Okay, so your tasks will be to do a worksheet and to do some reading from your textbook, as well as to make sure you're finished those first aid booklets, because those are due Friday, so you need to have a way to get them to me. 1 second. As well as there will be a first aid test at some point this week, and I will post that. Those of you that are in my Block 1 class, we are going to change the time for our meeting on Wednesday and Thursday to be during the Block 1 class, so this doesn't conflict with the rest of your meetings. So I will post that on Google Classroom, as well as your worksheet, and as well as the questions you need to read from your textbook. All right, any questions from you guys before we sign off? Owen, you're asking how to use Moodle. Moodle, you follow the video and follow the instructions on the video, and that should work for you. Okay. Any other questions? Anything about what we talked about today? As you can see, I'm getting used to this format, so we're hoping that this will get a little smoother as we move on. If you have any verbal questions you want to ask, you can just unmute your mic and ask as well.
You said that.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Brayden.
Okay, so you said that we can scan them on the you sent out the email saying that we could scan the paper copies. How do we scan them?
You can actually just take pictures if you have access to a phone, and just send me individual pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's the easiest way to go for you, then do it. I want it to be whatever's the easiest way for you guys to do. And I think there's some things, my husband was just looking at notes. If you go to the notes part of your phone, there is a way to open up to take a picture and then send that as a PDF. So there are some different apps that do that, but if you want to just do it, just a regular picture and send that to me, that works too. Okay. Any other questions? All right, guys, then we'll sign off. I will post this video so you have access to it later. And have a great day, and we'll see you guys again on Wednesday. So those of you in Block 1 will have a new meeting time for Wednesday and Friday, and I will post that for you. All right, have a great day. We will talk to you guys later.
bruh.